Whitaker's The Pit Season 1 finale twist explains one of his confusing lines from episode 12. Warning: this article contains spoilers for The Pit Season 1, episode 15. Dr. Dennis Whitaker had a very confusing line in The Pit episode 12, but the season finale finally explained it. Whitaker was easily one of the best characters in the cast of The Pit, and the ending of The Pit Season 1 somehow made him even better. He had a lot of notable moments throughout his 15-hour shift, from catching and killing a rat to having to change his scrub several times, and he handled them all with a lot of endearing qualities. One part of Whitaker's story, however, was a bit confusing. In The Pit episode 12, just before the Pitfest shooting victims started to flood into PTMC, Whitaker said something mildly strange. Robbie and Gloria were discussing what to do with all the patients they were about to receive, and Whitaker noted that an entire wing of the hospital was empty and ready for patients to be moved there. The conversation quickly moved on from there, so it was easy to miss, but it was still odd that Whitaker somehow knew about an empty wing of the hospital he was interning at. Luckily, The Pit Season 1's finale gave it a lot of context. As Dr. Santos discovered at the end of The Pit, Whitaker had been sleeping in the empty wing of PTMC for a considerable amount of time. The fact that Whitaker was basically living in the empty wing of PTMC explains exactly why he knew about it when the Pitfest shooting started. When Santos discovered his secret, Whitaker also explained that he had done a different rotation at PTMC before going to the emergency room, which helps explain how he discovered it ahead of time. Whitaker almost certainly knew that he was only able to live at the hospital because no one knew he was there, yet he was selfless enough to offer his home to people in need at the drop of a hat. The Pit's finale also made Whitaker's line in episode 12 even more remarkable. If the empty wing of PTMC had been used for the Pitfest shooting victims, Whitaker's living space would have been found, and he would likely have to have lived on the street. Whitaker almost certainly knew that he was only able to live at the hospital because no one knew he was there, yet he was selfless enough to offer his home to people in need at the drop of a hat. It's yet another example of Whitaker's generosity, and of the Pit's layered and heartfelt writing. It was a bit surprising that Whitaker was sleeping in the empty wing of the hospital, and in that surprise, the Pit didn't exactly explain why he was crashing there. Throughout their shift, Whitaker was very vocal about the money problems he was experiencing. He made reference to how he would never be able to pay off his medical school loans, and he was seen sneaking sandwiches into his pockets early on in the shift. Whitaker was sleeping in the empty wing of the hospital because he's poor and effectively unhoused. He didn't have rent money, so he slept in a place where no one would kick him out. The revelation that Whitaker was effectively unhoused also clarifies a lot of his more interesting moments from earlier in The Pit Season 1. For example, Whitaker jumped at the chance to join Kiara and the hospital street team delivering medication to unhoused people in Pittsburgh, likely because he realized he was very close to living on the street himself. It also makes all the wardrobe malfunctions he had even more bitter, as those were likely some of the only clothes he had. Somehow, the Pit found a way to make Whitaker even more likable right at the final moment. Whitaker's revelation in the finale of The Pit Season 1 didn't clear up everything, however, and it actually opened up a bit of a plot hole. It doesn't make much sense that Whitaker was able to live in the hospital's abandoned wing for a full month without being found. It may be an abandoned wing, but PTMC definitely has security, and they should have done a walkthrough of that wing at least once in a while. At the very least, they should have been checking for people like Whitaker, unhoused people who were living in the wing. It's frankly odd that Santos was the first person to discover Whitaker's living situation. On top of just general security, being able to find Whitaker, PTMC was probably planning on doing something with the abandoned wing. Whether it was closed for renovation or will eventually be reopened, The hospital would likely still be doing maintenance and other projects that would let them find Whitaker. He wasn't being very careful about his living arrangements either. If anyone had walked past Whitaker's room, even when he wasn't there, they would have seen his personal belongings, some food he kept next to his bed, and all his toiletries. It's frankly odd that Santos was the first person to discover Whitaker's living situation.